podcast that takes a deep dive into collaboration. I'm Wynne Leon, and in this episode, award-winning playwright Jack Canfora and I are with author Maxine Rosaler. Maxine's book of short stories, The Missing Kidney, was released in May of this year and picked by Oprah's Daily as one of the best summer reads of 2025. This is a fantastic book with stories told over decades. Many have been published in literary journals and are collected here in this delightful collection. Maxine tells us about the book and her love of delving into character. In this incredible book of stories set in the New York City of the 1970s and 80s, she talks about the city as a character in and of itself. Maxine tells us about how her time as a reporter helped hone her writing, and she gives us a preview of the two novels she's writing now. She tells us why she prefers writing short stories instead of novels, and how sometimes you have to let things bake for a while before you are ready to write about them. This is a great episode with the best short story writer you've never heard of, as Kirkus Reviews dubbed Maxine. We know you'll love it. Hi, Maxine.
Hi there. Hi, Wynne and Jack.
How are you?
Okay. Hi. Fine.
Good.
How are you?
We are so glad to be with you today because we love your writing. We, just even in the 10 minutes we've spent warming up for this, just fascinating to talk to you. So we're delighted to talk to you. And you just released your book, The Missing Kidney, May 2025, right?
Yes.
14 short stories. Can you give us an elevator pitch for this collection?
I can't really exactly give an elevator pitch, but I can tell you that I wrote these stories over a period of 40 years. Okay. They fall into like different categories. My writing is very character based, so I'm very interested in character, and I love quirky characters. So I would say that every story is very character based and about a quirky character. A lot of the stories are autobiographical or about people I know. And then some of them are just occur to me. And those actually are the easiest ones to write.
Mm-hmm.
People think that if you write autobiographical stories, you just record what you did. It's not true at all, because you have to twist yourself around and change things. But the stories that come most easily to me are the ones that I just make up. So there are just a few of them in there. The baby, the one I really love is Men on the Sidewalk Grieving. Sometimes a gesture will just, like with the baby, that story occurred to me because I saw this baby who just been adopted who was petting himself, and that seemed so tragic to me and interesting. A lot of the stories, though, I wrote a very long time ago, and they really include a lot of stuff about New York that's no longer here, like the peep shows on 42nd Street, the prostitutes and the drug dealers staking out corners in the East Village and in Times Square, the filthy subways, the graffiti-covered subways, the subways that were always breaking down, that were rarely air-conditioned. So there's a lot of that in the story. So I really love describing the city. I love the city. I've always loved the city. And since I've been here, it's certainly changed a lot.
Right.
And yet somehow it lives, which is really amazing, because I think the city is the people and the character of the people and the eccentricity of the people, the characters on the street. And that's what I like to draw into my writing, is I always love to observe people and write about them.
Yeah.
And so every now and then I'll find someone and I'll just jot it down, or I'll be on the subway and some pregnant woman will be there who's announcing that today is her birthday, or someone will be talking about Jesus and you're all damned. And so that's the city for you. So although all my favorite restaurants are gone, there are hardly any bookstores left, I still love the city.
Hmm.
So, and I don't know, it's a miracle that it survived.
That
But
you write about is New York City of the 70s and the 80s. Is that fair to
yes,
say?
most of the stories are there, and then a few of them occurred to me much later on. A lot of my stories have theme. I find that I'm very connected to certain themes, like denial is a very big theme of mine.
Hmm.
And somehow I always like to find the tragic and the comic in life. And I feel like if there's not tragedy, and if there's not, if the two aren't combined, if there's not something tragic, and I feel this way about people too, if there's not something tragic and deep about a person, but also something to sort of relieve the tragedy in absurdity or comic relief, then I'm just not interested. And that's how I feel about writers too. Like I feel like it's very hard for me to read a writer who doesn't combine those two elements, which I consider a big shortcoming of mine as a reader.
That's interesting. Um, what would you, it's interesting that, some of these have been gestating for, 40 years. Um, had you attempted to write them earlier? Because sometimes, in my experience, sometimes a couple times I've tried to do something and I've realized on some level it's not ready yet. It's not soup yet. It needs to, to simmer for a while in the
Well,
back of,
that is hell. Okay,
yeah.
that's really hell. And I have to say that I know one thing that you were interested in talking to me about is what I'm working on now. So I'm just going to jump all over the place if you don't mind.
Great.
Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, and I find that whenever I speak to another writer, like we'll always start off with one subject, go on tangents, and an hour later we're back to square one, right?
Okay.
So anyway, so I find that this story, this novel that I'm working on now, I didn't have a take on the character until very recently.
Hmm.
And it actually is based on my life. A lot of my writing is autobiographical, and
Mhm.
it's based on a relationship I had with an older man years ago. And
Mhm.
it always made me nauseous to think about him. And I didn't know what it was about him that appealed to me. So finally, I realized that it was the tragedy in his life that appealed to me. So this novel, if you want me to tell you about it,
Yeah, please do.
is about it's sort of a coming of age novel, so it's
Mm.
based very much on me. But again, autobiographical writing is such a can be such a deceptive thing because you can make yourself anything you want. You can
Mhm.
reveal truths about yourself that aren't truths, or you could hide truths about yourself. So it's really all up to you what you do. So with this novel, I realized that what attracted me to him was really the tragedy in his life. What happened was he was driving his car and with his son in the back in the front seat, and it toppled into a ravine and he crippled his son for life.
Oh.
Mm.
And somehow that made him, it sounds terrible maybe, but it made him interesting to me. And also I'm sort of excessively compassionate, so just kind of wanted to help.
Mhm.
So I feel like, another thing about my stories is that I really believe in the goodness of people and I really hate the badness in people.
Mhm.
So I would say that I'm very much driven by love and hate, extreme emotions. And that's what really drives me to write. But yes, sometimes you just don't know what you're going to
Yeah.
do. And with this character, it took me a long time to get a hold on him.
Mm.
And so is it therapeutic then? Because you said it made you nauseous to think about him. And
Was
now
it
you've,
therapy?
yeah, so is it therapeutic to sort of,
I don't know. I often think about that because, like, for example, like my novel, I wrote another novel, called Queen for a Day, which is
Mhm.
based on my experience as a mother of a child with autism. It's based on other mothers, right?
Mhm.
And I always like to plumb the depths of myself and other people.
Mhm.
Now, is it therapeutic? I don't know. I really don't know. I can't say that it is or it isn't. I'd say in some respects it is. Sometimes I can write about something that happened and I can take part of that feeling and put it on the page, right? But it always lives within me. So I think that there's a certain degree of therapeutic, there's certainly therapeutic. And I find like writing itself is extremely therapeutic
Mhm.
because for me, it's really the only way I can find peace of mind. I have a lot of anxiety, and it really wasn't until I started writing that I found peace of mind. And for years, I always had stories running around in my head And I was always writing for a living because I always earned a living as a journalist or doing something like that. And so I was honing my craft, but I wasn't doing what I wanted to do. And I often thought, well, I wasted all that time not writing, although I had all these stories running around my head. But I realized that the reason maybe that I wasn't really writing was because I hadn't found my voice. Because as soon as I sat down to write, I had my voice. I do find that sometimes, of course, and you'll know this, like as a writer, sometimes you'll write things that just completely repulse you, right? Like you just can't believe you wrote it. And there's less of that happens now. And who knows, maybe I was avoiding that.
Absolutely. And I find that same thing about writing, which is, you get to change that perspective. You get to flip it around. You get to see it backwards if you spend the time writing about it.
Yes, that's exactly what it is. And it's really writing is all about finding your angle.
Mhm.
If you have a fix on your character, then or, usually it's kind of smooth sailing, although you hit a lot of obstacles along the way. Yeah,
Yes.
but it's true. You have to get your angle. And for me, again, I always have to distance myself from myself, and that's how I use irony to distance myself from myself because I can be very mushy and gushy and it's really revolting. My husband is also a writer, so we edit each other. We really do need editors. You were saying that, Jack, before, right? And he gets rid of all the mush and gush and he goes on forever. He writes historical novels and he goes on forever, so I get rid of that. So we really do need editors, but we need the right editors.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Um,
you need a sympathetic but disciplined editor, tough editor.
Yes, yes. And sometimes you'll get bad advice. And you have to always know when to take. You're the ultimate arbiter of
Mhm.
what you're going to be doing. I mean, I've made mistakes sometimes going with people who've given me bad advice, but usually I end up, getting what I want. It really wasn't until I met my husband that it was kind of funny because when I met my husband, I'd finally sat down to write my first short story, which was Hospitality, which is in the collection, right? Which
Yep.
is based on which is the novel that I'm writing now is based on
Mhm.
those characters. And it's funny, like he came into my life and all of a sudden I'd written my first short story and he was going to look at my story and he was thinking, and look at this. This is our office. He reads all the time.
Yeah, very jealous of your bookcases.
Yeah,
Mhm.
right. Yeah.
Right.
He built them when we moved to the apartment, and a friend of mine said that's the last thing he's going to ever do. And you're right, in the apartment, right?
Yeah,
But
quit while you're ahead. Yeah,
what?
quit while you're ahead.
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
So and he was looking at my stories, and he
Mhm.
loved my writing. And then from then on, he was working as a temp typist because he didn't want to do anything that would interfere with his writing. And
Mhm.
so he would type up my stories at work and call me up with tears in his eye, with all choked up about things that I wrote. So it was wonderful. It was all I ever needed, really is affirmation because people have said to me, like, how could you go on for so long? Mind you, I had a lot of stories published in literary quarterlies,
Mhm.
but I didn't get my first book published, my first fiction book published until I was 67. And it
Mhm.
Yeah.
was really all I ever needed was my husband because I
Mhm.
respect him so much for support. And if you're a writer, you just have to write. It's just what you need to do. It's not about how you about success at all. It's all about your drive
Yeah.
Mhm.
and your need.
Right. Right. Well, you mentioned hospitality, and one of my favorite lines comes from that. My life, like a bagel, had no center. I had
Yeah,
always been indiscriminate in my choice of lovers, unsuitability being my major criteria.
that's true. And in the novel that I'm writing now, the first line used to be about how men used to follow me down the street, the sidewalks of the city with their briefcases and their suits and their ties and their business cards. And I always avoided men like that. I always avoided the men that other women wanted. I guess I've always was looking for character. And for some reason, I had a very prejudiced view of anyone who live the straight life, which is not such a great way, wasn't so smart of me, but that's why I always picked out weird people, you know. And again, it's in my nature to look for characters because I like
Mm-hmm.
quirkiness.
Mm-hmm.
And again, all the characters I write about are quirky.
Hmm.
Yeah.
How
Interesting.
how is working as a journalist? How did that shape your writing as a writer of fiction?
Okay, well, I would say that basically, I'd say working as a journalist, and I always worked as a writer of one sort or another.
Mhm.
Um, and I think basically it just honed my craft. It really developed my facility as a writer. So I have no trouble forming sentences. When I was a reporter for a community newspaper, for example, I would always look for the human interest stories. So I was always attracted to that. So I guess I got practice on my own writing about people. I never took a writing course. I would be afraid to take a writing course. I
Why?
really would.
Why?
I hate it. Go on.
No, just wondering why.
I just never occurred to me to do it. I have friends who teach writing, and they
Right.
always say you can't teach writing.
Right.
And it just never occurred to me to take a writing course. The way I learned to write, really, I just started writing. But then, in terms of, I'd already honed my craft as a writer. I'm very particular about prose styles. Like I can't read any writers who don't have prose styles that appeal to me. But I actually learned how to craft myself as a fiction writer by reading my favorite writers, John Cheever, who I absolutely love. I love him. He has such depth and he has such a sense of irony. And Flannery O'Connor,
Mm.
I was just wild about her. Her sense, her depth and her sense of the absurd. So I basically sometimes I would just be working on a story, and I'm just going to show you how some of my writing techniques, if anyone's interested.
Mhm.
Um, and so I would go and read the story, and then I'd have a pad and pencil by my bed because I always read in bed. And then I'd have the story that I was writing in the back of my mind, and then something that one of those writer would say would spark something in me, and I would write something of my own. Somehow, however, I never sound derivative. There's one line in one of my stories that's in this collection. It's in Zeldy Hamlish, where there's a scene where the woman is visiting someone in a nursing home, her father's old lover in a nursing home, and she hears a man talking to coals. The coals. Come on, baby. Light up, light up. And I just felt like that was John Cheeverish. So but
Mm.
I that but I do so that's really how I've learned how to write um and and it's just been a blessing for me. I don't know what I'll do if I can't write because I need it. Some people will say, "Well, how do you have the discipline to write and how could you have gone on so long without getting a book published?" It's what I need to do. I do it for myself.
Yeah.
And of course, I always do it with the reader in mind, but it's what I need to do.
Hmm. Yeah.
You talk about your husband's encouragement, but you've also gotten some pretty great press and feedback on the missing kidney. To quote from the New York Times book review, uh, brimming with scrappy characters navigating life in New York in the 70s and the 80s, both a kaleidoscope period piece and a timeless exploration of the complexities of human relationships.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, there you also were picked by Oprah's Daily as one of the best summer reads of 2025. Do you have a favorite piece of feedback?
Well, of course, being anointed by Kirkus Reviews as the best short story you've never heard of. That was nice. It was like a kind of backhanded compliment, but I
Right.
thought it was very generous. It was great getting that kind of feedback and those kind of reviews. The Missing Kidney got great reviews also. But these books don't really do very well. Not many people read literary fiction, but I think maybe they're afraid of it. But I always write to entertain and to, for fun. And again, I'm a very easy writer to read, maybe because I'm not an easy reader. I'm
Mm.
really not I'm not that great a reader. And of course, it's so gratifying to me.
Yeah.
I mean, there was this guy on Goodreads who wrote this review. He said, I now replaced his favorite short story writer. So that was nice. How invested am I in success? Not really that invested, but I'm invested in doing the best work I can. That's really what I'm about. I mean, that sounds does that sound vainglorious? Maybe it does, but it's the truth.
Well, it's
Well,
the only thing. It's the only thing you can control ultimately.
I'm
It's
sorry, say that again.
the only thing you can control ultimately. How well you do something. Is the effort you put in. The other things are external and don't necessarily have a lot to do with you. All you can control is your effort.
Yes, it's true. And a lot of writers waste a lot of time on, worrying about that.
Yeah.
And I'm very confident about the quality of my work. And I don't really waste time, I don't waste time worrying about success.
mhm,
Although,
mhm,
of course, I do expect success. I think everyone does in some way
mhm,
or another, but
mhm.
it's not what I hunger for the most.
Yeah. So you guys have to educate me since I'm not a New Yorker. You know, you write about New York in the 70s and the 80s, and you've talked a little bit about how it's changed because it really is sort of a character in your books. How has it grown up? How's New York changed in the last?
Well, New York has changed tremendously.
Hmm,
It used to be, I used to have all these wonderful places I used to love to go to all these restaurants. There used to be bookstores. There was a lot of old stuff in New York,
Mm.
old stuff. And I've always liked old stuff.
mhm,
And a lot of that has been replaced. There are hardly any bookstores left. There are really hardly any bookstores. I'm surprised. I mean, the Strand oh, this is kind of funny.
mhm.
Okay, so the Strand, which is just about the only, one of the very few independent bookstores left in the city, and they
That's why
they
books.
had me come in to sign some books, right? And I found my book in the historical fiction section. Now, how do you think that made me feel? Well, I refuse to feel old, okay? I feel like anyone in their 70s, and that's hard to believe. I don't think anyone can ever believe how old they are. I
Mm.
think, but I did ask them to change that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. So I loved the old New York thing.
That's where my books are stored in the bookstore.
Excuse me?
That's where my books are stored at the Strand.
Oh, really? So I
Mm.
love the idea of people just kind of having revelations and revealing their innermost, darkest thoughts
Mm.
without even knowing it.
Right.
Because I think so much of us hide from the darkness within us. And I
Mm.
think that just to be a human being in this world, you have to be in denial and you have to be hiding from from truth, right? But
Mhm,
every now and then it hits you in the face. And that's one of the things I like writing about. And I did that in another story too, Mary Grace,
mhm,
who was based that was based on a woman I was friends with. And she was this incredible optimist. She just thought everything was great. Everything was great. And this story is pretty much true to life. I mean, although I always make stuff up. And it turned out her life was really hell. She had a boyfriend, her husband who was a slime bucket. He was horrible. And the character I base on myself is really sick of herself. She wants to learn something different. So she's
mhm,
glomming on to very this kind of ridiculously optimistic woman, and she's believing in her optimism. And slowly but surely, she comes to see this woman's optimism is really all about denial because her life is really hell. And then I'm going to blow the ending of this story. And then she runs into this woman maybe a year or two later, and the woman is still putting on this false face, false front about how everything is great. And she talks about her husband, and her husband left her for a younger woman. And then the me character glances her unwittingly, she unwittingly reveals herself, her true self, and you just sort of see her face and
mhm,
you see the despair. So I love that. I love um I guess it's funny to talking to you. I'm sort of thinking about what themes do I have in
mhm,
my stories. Um And people, and then there are people who worship false gods, right? I have a thing about that too. Like in A Stroke of Luck, which was one of my
Mm-hmm.
first published stories. It was published in the Southern Review,
Right.
and that was great. And it also got some sort of honors and stuff. And that was based on a man, a very naive man, naive young man who embraced all the materialistic values of his peers. And then in the end, you just sort of see that he's just worshiping false gods.
Mm-hmm.
So I do find that I do have themes running through all
Mm-hmm.
my stories, that themes that I like to explore.
Right.
And I do believe in truth. I do believe in goodness. I do believe in love. I hate evil. I hate I hate lying. So I managed to embrace these. I managed to get it all out in my stories, how
Mm-hmm.
I feel. Because in real life, I'm not confrontational at all.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find that you you said you talk about you have certain themes in your writing. Are you conscious of them when you start writing that I'm gonna explore this theme, or do you find that they develop on their own and there's a commonality to your work that you're not conscious of when you're doing it?
No, they definitely develop on their own. I think that the reason I'm attracted to writing too is I feel like so much, first of all, the best writing, as you know, any writer knows, takes place in the unconscious mind. It's
Mm.
just basically your unconscious mind dictating to
Right.
is
Hmm.
dictating to your fingers. So lots of times I don't really consciously know what I'm doing or consciously think that. In fact, my husband will often say, "Oh, well, look what you did here. Look what you did there." I said, "What? I did that? I didn't know I did that."
Right. No.
And often I do some of my best writing when I'm swimming. I swim a lot, and sometimes I'll just sort of set myself an assignment and just thoughts
Must
that will
get
just,
paper must get wet though.
yeah, it does. Yeah, it does. But and then I always have to try to remember, well, am I going to remember this?
Yeah.
And I usually do.
Hmm.
Yeah.
That's interesting because for me, it's a little bit. I guess it's a little bit more tactile for me. Like it's hard for me to write in my head. Like I can think about ideas about but really like the dialogue or in your case the prose and dialogue. I need to sort of be writing that in order for that to happen.
Well, of course, when it comes to the writing,
Yeah, yeah.
that's a whole different story.
But you're saying your ideas sometimes you work
So the
through.
ideas, and then often I will come up with first lines or phrases, which I often will forget. But
Right.
I can say that, no, of course, it's the writing and the biggest pleasure, I think, I don't know how you feel about this, but it's such a pleasure to really mold your sentences, to really
Right.
um after the thing is finished,
Right.
to go and really craft it and then you feel like a
Yeah.
master of what you're doing. You know what you're doing, and it's a wonderful feeling. The worst feeling is facing the void. That is unbearable, and I think every writer faces that.
Jack has
Uh,
a phrase about calibrating sentences, which I love that phrase because I think that describes what you're talking about so well.
Oh yeah, it's wonderful. It's just like massaging the words, and I've always been in love with words. I'm in love with words and finding the right word, and I write, and for me writing is very musical. I really like, lots of times my husband, for example, will edit something. Oh, you're repeating yourself so much. Well, I like repeating myself because it fits in with the rhythms of my
Right.
sentences.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
So you talked
Well, from a craft perspective, talk to me about how you approach short stories versus novels. Like when do you know, oh, this is a novel story or this is a short story? And how do you approach it?
Okay. Well, with Queen for a Day, which was a novel and stories,
Hmm.
originally what I did was I wrote a bunch of short stories, right?
Hmm.
And then I decided to make it a novel and stories. So with that in mind, I went back to all those stories and somehow linked them together and created a chronology that would work as a novel.
Mm.
Um, Before that, I was always a short story writer. I never thought I could write a novel. And I don't think I ever want to write a novel, another novel again, because I find like writing a novel, you have to write things. This short stories are like poetry.
Hmm.
So you really can really get to, you can really, they're very concise and they really cut to the quick. A novel is more drawn out.
Do you do any outlining, or do you just sort of like wait for the discoveries as you're writing?
Well, sometimes I outline, sometimes I definitely outline, and sometimes I don't. And sometimes I like to know where I'm going, and sometimes I don't.
It's good.
And some, yeah.
Waiting for that flow state, right?
Yes,
Yes.
yes, really.
Yes.
The it's really amazing. You really have to tap into the unconscious because so this is the way it works, okay? The unconscious mind is what creates. The conscious mind is what molds. So that's where your craft comes in. So there's the craft versus the creation. And the creation has to just jump forth from you and flow from out of your unconscious onto the keyboard. I used to love writing in longhand, and I always used to write with pencils and yellow pads, but now I write on the computer. So
yeah. Well, Maxine, thank you so much for taking the time to talk about your book, The Missing Kidney, and your short stories and all of the work that you've done over your incredible career. So thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you. It's such a pleasure to meet both of you and such a pleasure talking to you. I love talking about this stuff. Okay.
It's so fun.
Okay. Take care now.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening. Our music was written for us by the incredible duo of Jack Canfora and Rob Koenig. For show notes and more great inspiration, see avitiva.com, avitiva.com.